Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It is about that time for Lincoln Riley in this USC program with that transfer portal window opening up shortly. I think we all expect USC to be one of the bigger players in the transfer portal across the country, largely for two different reasons. One, Lincoln Riley has historically shown he wants to use the transfer portal to make this roster better. I think more importantly, there's some legitimate pressure on Lincoln Riley to really put it together in 2025. And for those two reasons, I don't think USC spares many expenses going to the transfer portal and really hitting some home runs. Now, I want to do two different things. One, talk about some position groups that we think USC should be addressing in this offseason in the transfer portal. And then, secondly, let's offer up some names at each of these positions that USC might want to go out and try to address. Now, I think this conversation starts with the quarterback room, which I think there are so many different ways to look at the quarterback room and what it will look like in 2025. So I would love to hear the USC fans and kind of your takes in the comment section. Now, before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the USC fans. Y'all know it's that time of year. It's about to get busy when we talk about this program and the transfer portal. The amount of support y'all continue to show on the high school recruiting trail when we talk 2024 ball, when we talk the transfer portal, it's truly amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. A lot of different takes to be had. And without further ado, excuse me, let's get into this one. Let's start right there with the quarterback spot. I think it starts with what the outlook looks like for USC's quarterback room in 2025. Jaden, you've seen some good things from him. We're going to get into what we've seen from him in just a second. You have Hassan Longstreet coming in, who I think has an extremely bright future for USC. I would expect Miller Moss to transfer. And so as you sit right now, two scholarship quarterbacks on this team in 2025, you probably want three. Now, talking about who's going to be the guy for USC in 2025, look, I think you've seen some really good things and some exciting things from Jaden. We all see the talent and upside that he brings to this USC offense, but you've also seen some growing pains and some continued maturation that needs to take place. And for that reason, I would like to see USC go out and go big game hunting for a quarterback in the transfer portal. And I think when you're Lincoln Riley and you've had all the success designing offenses and developing quarterbacks, Lincoln Riley largely can get whatever quarterback that he wants. And so when you have that, like, go out and get one. Go out and get a difference maker to bring him in at this quarterback position and at least have him compete with guys like Hassan and Jaden heading into 2025. Now, the conversation now turns to what quarterback might that be? Let's start with Noah Fafita, an absolute gamer. I am. You won't find many people higher on Noah Fafita than I am. Now, have you seen the production dip in 2024? Yes, absolutely. I don't think that's entirely on Noah Fafita. One, you had a brand new coaching staff coming in. Number two, for as much media hype as Arizona was getting heading into 2024, outside of Noah Fafita and T-Mac, this team ain't that good. And so I don't think the supporting cast was all that good around Noah Fafita. So new coaching staff, not a great football team. I think that's the reason you saw Noah Fafita kind of dip in 2024. But you go back to 2023, this kid was checking all the boxes in terms of what you want in a difference maker at the quarterback position. Now, the bugaboo is, 5'10", a buck 90. That's why he was under recruited coming out of high school. But you go back to the 2023 film and even in 2024 and say, he knows how to play around the shorter stature. This kid is an extremely good athlete, getting outside the pocket, throwing off different platforms. For the lack of size, has an absolute cannon of an arm, can make any throw you want. But more importantly, again, we had this conversation in terms of what Miller Moss didn't have was, that playmaking ability. There just were certain things you couldn't ask Miller Moss to do. I look at Noah Fafita and say they ain't a thing that you can't ask Noah Fafita to do. And so I look at Noah and say he is a proven difference maker at the Power 4 level, a guy that when you give him help around him is going to be a very good quarterback. Noah Fafita to me makes a lot of sense, and I do think you're going to see him in the transfer portal over the next couple of weeks. Now, another name that I think I would be looking at is Jackson Arnold. Now, the knock on Jackson Arnold is you haven't necessarily seen him play elite football at the Power 4 level. I'm willing to not put that on Jackson Arnold. I love this kid coming out of high school. He goes to Oklahoma. Excuse me. Oklahoma went into the SEC this year in 2024. A lot of hype around Jackson Arnold. You saw some good things from him as a true freshman. Gave him probably the worst offensive line that you saw in the SEC. His 4 leading receivers all got hurt within the first 4 weeks of the season. Then they go out and just bench him. If I'm Jackson Arnold now, he's back starting for Oklahoma. I ain't coming back to Norman, Oklahoma. I look at I thought that was a really bad look for Brent Venables, kind of using Jackson Arnold as a scapegoat. And then he comes back and he's clearly the best quarterback that gives Oklahoma a chance to win. The offensive coordinator hire in Seth Luttrell was a disaster. I guess that's a long way of saying I think Jackson Arnold can play. I think he can be an elite quarterback when he's given the opportunity to be so. I would take a look at Jackson Arnold. Again, the one knock is a little bit of an unknown commodity because you haven't seen him play great football like a guy like Noah Fafita. I think he has that in him. And I think Jackson Arnold would make a ton of sense for USC. Last quarterback I'll throw out there, and look, I wasn't willing to kind of throw this one out there a couple weeks ago when we had a preliminary discussion about it. I'm willing to do it now. Jalen Milroe, this kid, probably the most talented, gifted quarterback that you see in the country, has been a roller coaster ever since he's been the starter at Alabama. The highs are Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback. The lows have been low. Jalen Milroe, to me, 3-4 weeks ago, I just thought was a lock to go to the NFL draft. So we didn't really talk about Jalen Milroe and, what he could be. I look at Jalen Milroe now and say, I think there's a good chance he might be in the transfer portal. And if he is, I couldn't think of a better fit. I mean, if Lincoln Riley has been known to maximize quarterbacks, and I would even argue that he maximized Miller Moss. Like, that's about as good as Miller Moss, I think, is capable of playing for USC. If you maximize Jalen Milroe, he's winning a Heisman Trophy, and you're winning a lot of football games in 2025. Now, again, I don't know if he'll hit the transfer portal. I don't know if he'll go to the NFL draft, but if he does hit the transfer portal, this would make too much sense. And if I'm Jalen Milroe, this is where I want to go. Like, I know I'm physically the gifted quarterback in all of college football. I got to go to a place that I'm going to get developed at the highest level. I don't think you get that offered anywhere but Lincoln Riley and USC. So I look at Jalen Miller and say this one makes too much sense if he does. Now, I don't know if he will. I probably still would project him not to. And if anything, he's going to the NFL draft. But if he does, and it looks more like he will now than it did 4 weeks ago, it's got to be your first call. This kid's an absolute stud. Now, another position group that I think is interesting to look at is the running back spot. Obviously, Woody Marks moving on. Woody Marks was such a home run hit for Lincoln Riley and USC. I think Woody Marks, there ain't many running backs playing better than Woody Marks in the country. We thought that was a nice addition, getting a experienced senior to come into a young running back room. They got everything they needed from Woody Marks this year. If you want to add another kind of guy that is experienced, because you look at the running back room and say, I got a ton of confidence in Quentin Joyner. I think he can be the guy. But if you want to add another experience back in this transfer portal window, Jaden Ott makes a lot of sense. Jaden Ott was one of the best running backs in all of college football in 2023. There was a lot of buzz that he'd hit the transfer portal after that year. Decides to come back to Cal, 2.9 yards per carry this year. That Cal team struggling at times in offense. If he's looking for a new spot to really show and maximize his talents, USC, it would be the move. And you look at Jaden Ott and say, one, you go back to the 2023 season, 1,300 rushing yards, 59 missed tackles forced, also catches the ball extremely well out of the backfield. I think there's a chance he hits the transfer portal after a very bad season in 2024, and I think USC should be a player. Now, the next position group that I think needs to be addressed is the offensive line. Now, heading into this conversation, you feel really good about Elijah Page next year at left tackle. I think that's a big storyline. You don't need to go out and get a premier left tackle, but you do want to fill in some depth, and you want to fill in some starting spots on the inside. You're losing a lot of guys to graduation, including some of the best players on this offensive line in Emmanuel Pregnon and Jonah. I'm looking at a couple different names. Now, let's start with some tackles, because I do think USC will both address the tackle and guard spot. Gage Casey at Boise State. Not sure if he's going to hit the portal, but if he does, I'd be calling him quickly. This is an interesting conversation to have. I think there are a lot of flashy offensive linemen that haven't played all that good, but were highly touted out of high school that will hit the transfer portal. Look past those guys. Historically, when you go back and look at the offensive linemen that have had the most success in the transfer portal, it's the guys that are at the G5 level that have played a ton of football at a good high level that make the jump to the P4 level and play good. Gage Casey is one of those guys. Started back-to-back years at Boise State. You take a look at his numbers, 352 pass per opportunity, 0 sacks. so only 6 quarterback hurries. This one would make a lot of sense. Another guy, this is another Arizona guy that I think would be worth looking at, Jonah Savinier. I think I said that right. I'm not sure. I love this kid's game, though. 6'5", 336, plays right tackle. I think he'd come in and start over Mason Murphy if Mason Murphy's back. Elijah Page, Jonah, on those two sides. Those are some really good bookend tackles for USC, and Jonah can get it going in the run game, too. 6'5", 336, was kind of supposed to be a interior offensive lineman out of high school. He's just too good of an athlete, too much length. And even at 336 pounds is a phenomenal athlete that's light on his feet. Last name I'd look at here at the guard spot, Marist Talavu. Now, he's a guy that from St. John Bosco, went to Utah, transferred to San Jose State, has graded out as one of the best interior offensive linemen that you see in the country. Again, I'm going to guys that have played a lot of football at the G5 level and are looking to make the jump up. Those, to me, seem like the offensive linemen that are the most effective additions in the transfer portal. This kid would make a lot of sense, too. Again, I think you feel better than you did 5-6 weeks ago for the offensive line because you're starting to see some of that young talent really put it together, most notably Elijah Page. And you feel good about guys like Tobias Raymond. Tobias Raymond 8 months ago during spring ball was getting a ton of buzz as a potential starter for USC. Now, we saw him a little in that Michigan game. It wasn't great. We knew Tobias Raymond would be a slow burn. I think there's a very good shot somebody like him is ready to rock and roll in 2025. So I think partially it depends on what have you seen from some of these depth pieces in practice. But I think you still want to go get some proven commodities on the offensive line. Those names stick out. Going to the defensive line, game record. Last year, we talked about USC adding depth on the defensive line. I think you have some quality depth heading into 2024 or 2025, excuse me. And you look at guys like Devin Tompkins, they think he's playing good football. G-Day, Carlin Jones will be definitely rotational pieces, with G-Day potentially being a monster next year. You might be adding Jakeem Stewart, who I think is a day one ready guy to work into the rotation. The depth on the inside of the defensive line, I think's good. Now you need game records because this USC pass rush needs to get better heading into 2025. And if you get a good USC pass rush with Dan Lin, this is going to be a really, really good defense. The most difficult part for Dan Lin to navigate this year is there's just not a ton of pass rush with the front four and the defensive line. You're having to rely on a lot of pressures to get quarterbacks off their spot. I think you want to try to avoid that in 2025, and it starts with getting game records. You look at Jaheim Otis in the transfer portal, the number one prospect. This kid, and I hate to say it, but he kind of reminds you a little bit of Bear Alexander, where it's like the physical traits are out of this world. Now, there are some concerns off the field. There are concerns with some consistency. I will go bet on Jaheim Otis because this is a guy that could potentially be a difference maker for USC on the inside of the defensive line. I'm also looking for a sack artist coming off the edge. This is my darling. If he hits the transfer portal, this is going to be my favorite player that's in it. Now, he leads the country in sacks, so maybe I'm kind of like claiming him as my diamond in the rough when I think there's going to be a lot of teams interested in him. Love the story here for Mike Green at Marshall. Committed to Virginia as a big-bodied wide receiver, was a state champ or second place in the state wrestler in the state of Virginia coming out of high school, puts on a bunch of weight, decides to become a pass rusher, 15 sacks, a 21% pass rush win rate, 30 run stops in the run game. USC's looking for that guy when it's third and long. Hey, we don't need to bring pressure because we got front four that can get after the quarterback. Mike Green would be that guy coming off the edge for USC. Last name I'll kind of throw out there in the defensive back room, and we're going to add to this list over the weeks, Sione Lalea. Obviously, USC was in it for him coming out of JUCO. He goes to Oregon. He kind of just getting squeezed out. Whenever this kid plays for Oregon, I think he's great. He's exactly what Dan Lin and Doug Belk are looking for in terms of bigger, longer boundary cornerbacks that can put hands on wide receivers. This one would make a lot of sense. Hasn't played a ton at the P4 level at Oregon. I don't think that's a result of him not being a good football player. I think it's just more of a result of Oregon kind of has what they need at the cornerback spot. I would go capitalize on this guy. You were in it for him coming out of high school. I think there's a chance that he hits the transfer portal because he's not playing as much as he thought. This one would make a lot of sense too. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.